It had been 20 years since Monica Bennett scattered what she thought were her husband's ashes into the Atlantic, whispering goodbye to a man she believed was lost to a drunk driver and bad luck. But standing in the anatomy lab of Atlanta Mercy Medical Center, she was staring at something impossible, a body that should be turned to dust decades ago. There inside the left thigh gleamed a titanium rod she knew by heart. Marcus Bennett's rod. The same one surgeons had placed after his motorcycle crash a year before he died. In that instant, grief turned into suspicion, and suspicion into a fight that would shake an entire hospital to its knees. It had been 20 years since Monica Bennett stood on the wet sand of Tybee Island, holding an urn she believed carried what was left of her husband. The wind was cold that morning, slicing through her thin black dress as she whispered his name to the sea. "Rest now, baby. You're free." She had meant it. She had believed it. For 2 decades she lived with that truth that Marcus Bennett, her husband, her first love, the father of the child she carried, had died on a stretch of Atlanta highway when a drunk driver blew through a red light. 20 years of grief, of anniversaries marked by silence, of an empty side of the bed that never stopped feeling cold. But all it took was one wrong turn inside a hospital to unravel everything she thought she knew about life, death, and the men who play God with both. The day it happened, the air in Atlanta was thick with the kind of late summer humidity that clings to your skin like guilt. Monica was 42 now, a veteran elementary school teacher with tired eyes and a smile she'd learned to wear like armor. Her daughter Ava, born 3 months after Marcus's funeral, was a pre-med student at Atlanta Mercy Medical Center, the same hospital where her father's death certificate was stamped, signed, and filed away in some forgotten drawer. When Ava called that morning, her voice had its usual rhythm, bright and hurried. "Mama, I left my lunch on the counter again. Can you bring it? Ivy got a break in an hour." Monica laughed softly, rolling her eyes. "You'd forget your head if it wasn't attached." "I'll be there soon." She hadn't stepped foot inside Atlanta Mercy since 2004. The memory of that place, its sterile smell, its quiet halls, its pitiless fluorescent lights had lived in her bones like a ghost. But for her daughter, she pushed the unease down and drove across town. The hospital looked different now, newer wings and polished glass. But the air inside still carried that same antiseptic chill. She parked, texted Ava, and followed the signs toward the volunteer office. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd floor, she made a wrong turn. It was small, a moment of distraction, her phone buzzing, a nurse pushing a cart past, but it led her into a corridor she didn't recognize. The hallway was quieter there, the hum of conversation replaced by the low buzz of machinery. She passed a room with a door propped open, its stainless steel light glinting against white tile. Out of instinct, or maybe something deeper, something she couldn't name, Monica glanced inside. The smell hit her first, formaldehyde and metal, clean yet unnatural. Then she saw it. A body lay on the table, half covered, dissected in places for what she assumed was medical study. It should have been another anonymous cadaver, a lesson in human anatomy for students. But her gaze snagged on something she couldn't look away from, a strip of exposed muscle, the pale curve of bone, and through the center of the femur, a glint of metal, a long titanium rod held in place with surgical screws. Her breath caught in her throat. The room blurred at the edges. She knew that shape. She knew that shine. Marcus had carried that rod in his leg ever since the motorcycle crash in Zone 3. She remembered the X-rays, the way the doctor traced the metal line with his finger, and said it would stay there for life. Permanent. Unmistakable. A part of him forever. But this couldn't be him. It was impossible. Marcus was gone, cremated, his ashes scattered. Still, her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to break free. Monica stood frozen for what felt like hours, staring at that body, at that sliver of metal that had no right to exist. A nurse passed by and startled her out of the trance. "Ma'am, are you lost?" Monica blinked, mumbled something about finding the volunteer office, and walked away fast, her pulse still unsteady. By the time she reached Ava, she was trembling. "You okay, Mama?" Ava asked, taking the brown lunch bag from her hands. Monica forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just got turned around in this maze of hallways. I'm fine, baby. Eat your food. But she wasn't fine, not even close. That night, the image haunted her. The titanium rod gleaming under white light. The cold stillness of that body. She told herself it was coincidence. Lots of people had rods in their legs, surgeries, accidents. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face, heard his laugh. The memory of his voice over the phone that last day came rushing back, ordinary and warm. Pad that, right? The baby wants pad that. Her hand pressed against her belly, his voice in her ear, and then the sound of the crash that ended everything. Days passed, but sleep didn't come. Monica kept seeing that lab in her dreams, the table, the steel, the smell of chemicals. The idea burrowed deep into her thoughts, whispering things she didn't want to believe. What if the ashes weren't his? What if someone lied? What if Marcus never made it to the crematorium? She tried to pray the thoughts away, but God stayed silent. Then, one evening, while grading papers, a news headline popped up on her phone. Mother finds missing son's body in medical exhibit after 25 years. The article described a woman in Chicago who recognized her son's surgical skull scars on a display at a traveling anatomy show. Dina confirmed it. The boy had been stolen from a morgue, sold for profit. Monica read it once, then twice. By the third time, her hands were shaking. The story hit her like a revelation and a curse. If it happened to that woman, why not her? Marcus had died at a hospital with the same kind of morgue, the same procedures, the same opportunities for corruption. The more she thought about it, the less crazy it sounded. The hospital had handled his body. The funeral home had done the cremation. What if someone along the way, someone with the power to sign papers and move bodies, had decided to make a little money instead? She couldn't let it go. The next morning, she searched the hospital's website. They offered public tours of their medical education facilities, including the anatomy lab. For donors and families interested in learning about body donation, the description read. Monica clicked register. The tour was in 4 days. She told no one, not Ava, not Nami, not even God. Those 4 days stretched out like a punishment. She barely ate, barely slept. Her colleagues at school asked if she was okay. She smiled and lied. At night, she sat by her window, staring at the city lights flickering like uncertain stars. The part of her that was rational whispered that she was being ridiculous. The part of her that was a mother, a wife, a black woman who'd been ignored by institutions her whole life, that part knew better. She'd seen too much to trust authority blindly. She'd learned that when the world tells a woman, like her, she's imagining things, it's usually because she's getting close to the truth. When the day finally came, she dressed in quiet colors, a gray sweater, dark jeans, nothing that would draw attention. The tour group was mostly older folks, couples holding hands, retirees curious about donating their bodies to science. The student leading them, a young white woman with a cheerful smile, talked about the gift of education and the selflessness of donors. Monica nodded along, pretending to listen, her heart thudding in her chest. When they entered the anatomy lab, the air was sharp and cold. Rows of stainless steel tables lined the room, each holding a form draped in white. These donors, the guide said, help train hundreds of future doctors every year. Monica scanned the tables one by one, searching. Her breath quickened, and then there it was. Table 4. The body she'd seen through the doorway. Her body remembered before her mind caught up. The left leg, the exposed femur, the gleam of titanium. Her mouth went dry. She stepped closer, ignoring the murmured questions around her. Up close, it was worse, or maybe better. Confirmation. The screws were positioned the same way she remembered from Marcus's X-ray. And then she saw more. The vertebrae 2 fused together in the neck, C5 and 6, a congenital trait Marcus had been born with. Her eyes dropped lower. Across the abdomen, thin silver lines of surgical mesh glinted beneath the preserved tissue. A hernia repair, another match. Her gaze rose to the jaw, where 3 titanium posts formed a neat triangle. Dental implants, exactly like his. 4 signs, 4 impossibilities. Monica felt the floor tilt beneath her. The air left her lungs. "That's my husband," she whispered, and then louder, "That's my husband." The tour guide froze. People turned, cameras came out, security was called. But Monica didn't care. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't mistaken. She was a woman staring at the proof that her whole life had been built on a lie. And for the first time in 20 years, her grief had a target. Atlanta in the fall always carried a strange kind of quiet, a calm that settled over the city before winter rolled in. The heat broke, the air thinned, and the skyline looked softer, almost forgiving. But inside Monica Bennett's apartment on Auburn Avenue, there was nothing soft left. Her nerves were raw, her sleep was broken, and every corner of her home seemed to whisper with memories she'd spent 20 years trying to bury. For days after that hospital tour, she moved through her life like someone half awake, doing all the right things but feeling none of them. She went to work, taught her students about fractions and reading comprehension, smiled when she needed to, but inside, something had cracked open. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was knowledge, deep, sickening knowledge, and it ate at her like rust on steel. The morning after the incident, she sat in her car for almost an hour before driving anywhere. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, her coffee set untouched, cold. She had seen Marcus's body, or at least what was left of it, and the world around her refused to make sense. She wanted to tell someone, to scream it, to make the whole world hear, but the second she imagined the disbelief in their eyes, she froze. Because who would believe that? A black woman walking into a hospital and claiming a cadaver was her husband from 20 years ago. They'd look at her the same way they always did when black women raised their voices, like she was hysterical, emotional, unstable. That thought alone made her sick. By the time she got to work, her head was pounding. The classroom, normally her sanctuary, felt smaller that day. The sound of children laughing, pencils scratching on paper, chairs dragging across linoleum, it was all too loud. At lunchtime, she sat at her desk staring at the same page of lesson plans for 20 minutes. Her colleague, Mrs. Watson, a round-faced woman with kind eyes, knocked on the door and peeked in. "You good, baby? You look like you've seen a ghost." Monica's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Maybe I have," but she didn't explain. She couldn't. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table long after Ava had gone to bed, flipping through an old box of photographs. Marcus's smile looked different in every picture, sometimes wide and careless, sometimes quiet and knowing. She ran her fingers over the images, tracing the lines of his face, the curve of his jaw. The thought hit her like a gut punch. That same jaw, that same bone structure, was sitting on a metal table in a hospital lab. She felt her stomach twist. Her hand shook as she lifted the photo closer. "Why didn't they let you rest?" she whispered. The sound of her own voice startled her. She pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. Over the next week, her thoughts spiraled. The more she tried to rationalize, the more impossible it became. If Marcus's body had really been cremated, there would be records, paperwork, receipts, something. The funeral home had promised everything was handled. But she couldn't even remember the name of the man who'd helped her then. She remembered a thick accent, a clipboard, the smell of lilies and formaldehyde, but not his face. Her sister Naomi had done most of the talking that week. Monica had been too numb to function. Maybe Naomi would remember. Maybe Naomi would know where to start. When she finally called, Naomi picked up on the second ring. "Hey, little sis. Everything all right?" Monica hesitated, biting her lip. "Not really." Naomi's voice changed immediately, sharp, alert, protective. "Tell me what's wrong." Monica took a deep breath and said it out loud for the first time. "I think Marcus's body is still at Atlanta Mercy." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a slow, careful, "What do you mean still?" Monica explained everything, the wrong turn, the titanium rod, the vertebrae, the mesh, the implants. Naomi didn't interrupt once. When she finished, the line stayed quiet for a moment. Then Naomi said, "You sure about what you saw?" "I'm sure," Monica said, her voice steady now. "I'm not crazy, Naomi, it was him." Her sister sighed, long and low. You know what they'll all say, right? They'll say you re-grieving, that you're reimagining things, that you're unstable. Let them, Monica said. I know what I saw. Naomi's tone softened. Then we were going to handle this the right way. No shouting, no breaking down in their offices. We get the records, we get the facts, and we make them listen. Monica felt her throat tighten. You believe me. You were my sister, Naomi said simply. I've been fighting the system long enough to know when a black woman's truth gets buried under paperwork. I believe you. It should be felt like relief, but it didn't. It felt like the beginning of something heavy, a fight she hadn't asked for, but couldn't walk away from. Naomi told her to sit tight until the weekend here. She'd drive up from Savannah, and they'd go together to the hospital administration. Monica agreed, though every hour that passed made her more restless. She spent those days gathering everything she could: Marcus's old medical files, a copy of his death certificate, the receipt from the funeral home, the obituary clipping. The papers looked innocent on the table, but to her, they were evidence of betrayal. Ava noticed the change in her mother before anyone else did. Mama, you've been up all night again, she said one morning, her brow furrowed with concern. Monica smiled weakly. Just couldn't sleep. You sure you're okay? I'm fine, baby. Don't worry about me. But Ava did worry. She watched her mother move like someone being haunted, whispering to herself while sorting through old files, jumping whenever the phone rang. One night, Ava asked the question Monica had been dreading. Is this about Dad? Monica froze, the words catching in her throat. Ava's eyes softened. You still miss him, huh? Every day, Monica said. That was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. She wasn't just missing him anymore. She was looking for him. When Saturday came, Naomi arrived wearing her work blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. She looked every bit the lawyer. She was calm, controlled, precise. But Monica could see the storm behind her eyes. They hugged long and hard, then drove in silence to Atlanta Mercy. The hospital gleamed in the morning sun, glass walls reflecting the city back at them. You ready for this? Naomi asked as she parked. Monica nodded, but her stomach churned. Inside, everything felt too familiar. The smell of antiseptic, the distant echo of footsteps on tile. It was like stepping into a memory she didn't want. Naomi approached the front desk, her voice firm. We need to speak to an administrator about a potential issue with a body identification from 2004. The receptionist blinked, uncertain. That's an old case. We'll wait, Naomi said, and they did for almost an hour, until a tall man in a suit appeared. His badge read to Richard Collins, Hospital Administration. Monica's heart stopped. She recognized him. He was the one who had told her Marcus was dead 20 years ago. He led them into an office that smelled faintly of coffee and arrogance. Mrs. Bennett, he said, with the practiced sympathy of a man who'd said those words too many times. What can I do for you? Monica stared at him, trying to steady her breathing. Naomi spoke instead. My sister believes her husband's body, Marcus Bennett, is currently in your anatomy lab. Collins didn't flinch. That's impossible. All cadavers in our program are verified donors. Then you won't mind verifying that one, Naomi replied. The one on table 4. For the first time, his smile wavered. I'm sorry, but we can't just open up donor records. That would violate confidentiality. Confidentiality doesn't cover stolen bodies, Naomi said flatly. Either you check, or I'll have a subpoena on your desk by tomorrow. Collins's jaw tightened. You were being unreasonable. No, Naomi said, I'm being patient. Monica stayed quiet, her heart hammering. The room felt too small, the air too thick. When Collins finally stood, he looked at Monica like she was fragile glass about to shatter. Mrs. Bennett, he said, I understand how grief can distort memories. You're under a lot of stress, don't you dare, Monica snapped, her voice rising. Don't talk to me like I'm some fragile little woman who doesn't know what she saw. I've buried a husband. I've raised a daughter. I've worked every day of my life to hold it together. I'm not crazy. That's my husband in your lab. The silence that followed was electric. Naomi reached over and placed a calming hand on her sister's arm, but her eyes never left Collins. You heard her. Now do your job. Collins didn't answer. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security, please escort our guests out." And that was how the second battle began, not with violence, but with dismissal. The same way it always began for women like them. Monica and Naomi walked out of the hospital that day under weight of stares and whispers, but neither looked back. Because the truth was no longer a question. It was a weapon, and they were just learning how to use it. The rain came hard that night, drumming against the windows of Monica Bennett's apartment, like the sky was trying to warn her. Thunder rolled over Atlanta, and every flash of lightning threw her reflection across the living room, glass-attired woman in a worn gray robe. Eyes dark from sleepless nights, clutching a folder like it was the last piece of truth left in the world. Inside that folder was everything she had: Marcus's X-rays, his dental records, hospital paperwork yellowed at the edges, the faded cremation certificate from Eternal Grace Funeral Home. Each page smelled faintly of dust and regret. Naomi sat across from her, laptop open, her face lit by the cold blue glow of the screen. She'd been digging for hours, cross-checking records, looking for names. Anything that might prove what they both already knew: Marcus Bennett had never been cremated. "You see this?" Naomi said finally, spinning the laptop toward her. On the screen was a scanned city record, a list of cremations reported to the Georgia Department of Health in 2004. Monica leaned in, her heartbeat in her ears. There it was: Bennett, Marcus, a cremation completed, a 66204 Eternal Grace Funeral Home. Next to it, a number, a certification ed. Naomi's finger tapped the screen. Every cremation is supposed to have a corresponding weight record, temperature log, and witness signature. But look, this one's missing 2 of those. "What does that mean?" Monica asked, her voice low. Naomi's expression hardened. "It means it could be fake." Monica swallowed hard, her throat dry. "So they forged it." Naomi nodded. "It wouldn't be the first time. Funeral homes cut corners all the time. Sometimes it's greed, sometimes negligence. But this," she pointed to the missing data, "this looks deliberate." Monica felt her stomach twist. "So they took his body. They took him." Her voice cracked on the last word. Naomi reached across the table, her hand firm over Monica's. "We were going to find out who did this. But we do it smart. No more going in there alone." For the next week, their days became a rhythm of strategy and frustration. Naomi worked contacts in law enforcement and public records, while Monica followed paper trails, death certificates, delivery receipts, any scrap of documentation tied to Eternal Grace or Atlanta Mercy. Every phone call led to another brick wall. "Sorry, ma'am, those records were lost in a system upgrade. We can't release that information without a court order. I'm afraid our manager no longer works here." It was like the whole city had conspired to keep her in the dark. On the 7th day, Naomi called from her office. "I found something." Monica gripped the phone tighter. "Tell me." "A man named Victor Ivanov. He's been the morgue director at Atlanta Mercy since 2001. Used to be a coroner in Moscow before he moved here. Guess who signed Marcus's body release form?" Monica's breath hitched. "Him. His signature's on the paperwork transferring the body from the hospital to the funeral home. But here's the thing, Ivanov's name shows up on almost every transfer from that year. And not just for Atlanta Mercy. He's connected to at least 3 other hospitals and 2 funeral homes. That's not normal." Monica felt a chill run through her. What if he sold them? Like the story I read, the mother who found her son. Naomi hesitated. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." The line went quiet. The idea hung there between them, ugly and real. That night Monica couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching rain gather on the glass, her mind spinning. Every memory of Marcus came flooding back: his easy laugh, his stubborn kindness, the way he used to fix everything in their apartment with duct tape and determination. She thought about how he used to say, "If something breaks, you don't throw it out, you fix it. You fight for it." And maybe that's why she couldn't stop now. Even after 20 years, she still loved him enough to fight. The next morning, Naomi showed up unannounced, a coffee in one hand and a file in the other. "You need to see this," she said, pushing past the doorway. Monica followed her to the table. Naomi spread out a series of printed photos. Viktor Ivanov standing in front of a black Mercedes. Viktor at a country club dinner. Viktor's name listed as a donor on a private school scholarship page. He's living way beyond what a morgue director makes. 75 grand a year doesn't buy you a house in Buckhead and 3 rental properties. Monica stared at the photos, disbelief giving way to rage. So he's selling them. Our people. Naomi nodded grimly. Bodies go for 15, 20 grand to medical schools, especially if they were well preserved. Multiply that by dozens of bodies over 20 years, and you were looking at almost $1 million. Monica pressed her hand to her forehead, feeling dizzy. He sold my husband's body like it was merchandise. Naomi's voice softened. He did worse than that. He sold your closure. He stole your peace. Monica looked up, tears stinging her eyes. Then we make him pay. They began building a case. Naomi filed formal requests for Marcus's autopsy and cremation documentation. She also contacted a private investigator. She trusted a retired detective named Raymond Coles, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s with a deep voice and no patience for bullshit. When they met him at a small diner on Edgewood Avenue, he listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his seat and said, "You retelling me you saw your husband's body in a med school lab after 20 years. And the hospital tried to gaslight you into thinking you were crazy." Monica nodded. Exactly that. Cole scratched his chin. Then someone's covering their tracks, and cover-ups always leave receipts. Within a week, Coles had found a paper trail, quiet but undeniable. Wire transfers from the hospital's internal accounts to an external consultancy linked to Ivanov. Cash deposits totaling nearly $900,000. And buried inside one of the old ledgers, a line that made Monica's heart stop. Zo 60-2004 Bennett Emd. 18,000 transfer to Atlanta Mercy Med program. She felt the air leave her lungs. There it was. Proof that Marcus had been sold like a commodity. She couldn't speak for a moment, her throat too tight, her mind screaming. Naomi closed the folder slowly, her face pale. "We've got him," she said. But Monica couldn't feel triumph yet, only fury, sharp and clean. They drove to the police department the next day, armed with the evidence. Detective Mark Peterson listened politely, his pen tapping the desk as Monica told her story from the beginning. When she finished, he sighed and leaned back. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't open investigation on this." Naomi's jaw clenched. "Why not?" "Because what you re-suggesting stolen bodies, forged cremations, a hospital conspiracy, it's a hell of a claim. You'd need a DNA match to prove that cadaver is your husband." Monica leaned forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "Then get one." "I'd need a court order," Peterson said, already standing. "No judge is signing off on that based on a hunch." Monica stared at him, disbelief turning to anger. "A hunch? You think I want this? You think I made it up because I miss him?" The detective's tone softened but stayed patronizing. "I think you re-grieving, ma'am, it happens." Naomi stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Save your sympathy, detective. We'll handle it ourselves." Back in the car, the city blurred past in streaks of red and gold. Monica sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. "He didn't believe me," she whispered. Naomi's voice was steady but cold. "They never do. But that's fine. We don't need their permission to find the truth." And in that moment, as the rain began again, Monica felt something shift inside her. The fear that had paralyzed her for weeks was gone, burned away by rage and resolve. They could call her crazy. They could shut their doors and turn away. But she knew what she saw. She knew what they did. And she was done being quiet. The storm outside matched the one inside her chest, loud, relentless, cleansing. For 20 years, she had lived believing her husband was ashes scattered into the sea. Now she knew better. He was still here, trapped by greed and corruption. But not for much longer. Because Monica Bennett had nothing left to lose, and everything left to prove. The days that followed blurred into each other, long stretches of unease stitched together by coffee, paperwork, and silence. Monica Bennett had always believed that the hardest part of grief was learning to live with absence. But she was starting to understand that the real horror was what happened when the absence started speaking back. Everywhere she went, she felt Marcus's presence, not in the sentimental way of widows clinging to memory, but like something unfinished calling from the edge of her mind. When she walked down the street, the world seemed to hum with the wrongness of it all, as if Atlanta itself knew that something sacred had been stolen and repurposed for science and profit. Nami spent her days on the phone, her voice clipped and professional as she wrangled with officials, hospital lawyers, and journalists she half trusted. Monica, meanwhile, found herself sinking into old rituals. She would light a candle in front of Marcus's photo each night, the same one she'd placed on their wedding anniversary every year since 2004. But this time, instead of praying for his peace, she prayed for his justice. The flame trembled each time she whispered his name. Some nights she thought it flickered in reply. One morning, Ava came home early from the hospital. She was pale, her backpack slung over one shoulder like she'd run out the door. "Mama," she said quietly, "something happened." Monica froze mid-step. "What do you mean?" Ava pulled out her phone and handed it to her. The screen showed a news headline from an Atlanta paper: "Hospital employee fired amid body donation scandal." Beneath it, a grainy photo of Viktor Ivanov. "They reinvestigating him," Ava said. "I heard some of the med students talking about it today. They said he might have been selling unclaimed bodies." Monica's hands began to shake so hard she nearly dropped the phone. "It's him?" she whispered. Ava frowned. "You know that man. He's the one who signed your father's body release." Ava's face went pale. "Mama, don't," Monica interrupted. "I know what you're rethinking, but I'm not crazy. I told them this weeks ago, and they tried to lock me up for it. Now it's in the damn paper." Nami arrived an hour later, holding 2 coffees and a stack of folders. "You saw the article?" she asked, barely out of breath. Monica nodded. "Ava showed me." Naomi set the cups down and opened her folder. "It's spreading. Reporters are digging into hospitals across the state. Ivanov's name keeps coming up, but they still haven't connected to Marcus. Not yet." Monica clenched her fists. "Then we make them connect it." That afternoon, Naomi arranged a meeting with Gerald Preston, the head of the hospital's legal department. He was the kind of man who always looked like he'd just been interrupted from something more important. His office was all glass and metal, minimalist, expensive. "Sus Bennett, Ms. Bennett," he greeted, gesturing toward the sleek chairs across from his desk. "I understand you have concerns." Naomi didn't sit. "Concerns," she repeated. "Your morgue director's under investigation for trafficking human remains. My sister's husband's body is one of them." Preston exhaled through his nose, steepling his fingers. "You have to understand, this is a complex situation. We're cooperating fully with law enforcement, then cooperate with us," Monica said. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "Let me see the cadaver. Let me prove what I already know." Preston's eyes flickered, but his tone stayed calm. "That's not possible, Mrs. Bennett. The cadavers are under preservation protocols. We can't allow unsupervised access." Naomi stepped closer. "Then let us see the records, donor consent forms, identification logs, chain of custody. If you have nothing to hide, you will hand them over." "Those are confidential," he said quickly. Naomi smiled without warmth. "You might want to call your PR team, Mr. Preston. Because if we walk out that door, this becomes a public story by warning." For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, the city traffic buzzed faintly through the tinted windows. Finally, Preston stood, muttering something about needing to make a call. He disappeared into the hallway. Monica turned to Naomi, whispering, "You think he'll do it?" Naomi's mouth pressed into a thin line. "He'll do something. The question is whether it's honest." When he returned 20 minutes later, his face had changed. The careful confidence was gone, replaced by something tighter, anxiety maybe, or guilt. "We conducted a preliminary review," he said. "The cadaver in question does, in fact, exhibit the surgical characteristics you described: the titanium rod, the vertebral fusion, the mesh, the dental implants. However, nothing," Naomi interrupted. "That's Marcus. You have his body in your lab." Preston rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We'll authorize a DNA test within 48 hours. But please understand, Mrs. Bennett, This process will take time. Monica stared at him. Time's all I've been giving you people, she said, her voice trembling. 20 years of it. The test was done that week, though the results would take 2 more. Monica spent those 14 days in limbo, floating between hope and dread. Every sound made her jump. Every ring of the phone felt like judgment. Ava tried to distract her. They cooked dinner together, watched old movies, even laughed once or twice, but nothing really cut through the waiting. Some nights Monica found herself driving without knowing where she was headed until she ended up at Tybee Island, parked by the shore where she had once scattered the ashes. The ocean looked black under the moonlight, endless, cruel. She stood there listening to the crash of the waves, and said softly, "If you still here, Marcus, I'm not stopping. Not until you come home." When the call finally came, Monica was sitting at her desk at school, grading papers while the children were at recess. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Naomi's name. Her stomach dropped. Becca, Naomi said. She always called her that when the truth was too heavy for full names. Sit down. Monica's knees went weak. She sank into the chair. It's him, isn't it? Naomi's breath caught on the other end. 99.97% match. It's Marcus. The world went quiet. No sound, no movement, just the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Monica's pen slipped from her fingers and hit the desk. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh my God." She hung up without remembering how and sat there, staring at the papers in front of her, a stack of math worksheets, covered in the handwriting of 8-year-olds who still believed adults always told the truth. For the first time, she envied them. That night, she cried until her voice gave out. Not the clean tears of closure, but deep, shaking sobs that came from some place raw and ancient. Ava held her, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. When morning came, Monica felt hollowed out, but underneath the exhaustion, something fierce had settled. Rage, yes, but also purpose. She looked at her daughter, who was watching her silently from the kitchen doorway. "We're going to bury him again," Monica said. "Properly this time." Naomi wasted no time. Within days she had filed both a civil lawsuit and a criminal complaint. The news spread like wildfire. Atlanta widow finds husband's body after 20 years, the headlines screamed. Cable reporters camped outside Monica's apartment. Neighbors whispered. Strangers sent letters, some full of sympathy, others full of conspiracy theories. Through it all, Monica stayed still, calm, unyielding. She didn't want fame. She wanted accountability. When the state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation, everything moved fast. Detectives raided Ivanov's home and found cash, ledgers, and correspondence with multiple funeral homes, including Eternal Grace. One ledger listed 47 names. One of them was Marcus Bennett, sold for $18,000. It was over. But as Monica sat across from the investigators giving her statement, she realized something else. This wasn't just her story. It was the story of 46 other families who'd been robbed of peace, of dignity, of the simple right to lay their loved ones to rest. Later that night, after the reporters left and the city quieted down, Monica stood on her balcony with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The wind was cool against her skin. Below, Atlanta pulsed with light and noise, oblivious to the revolution that had just begun. She thought of Marcus, not the body in the lab, but the man who had once danced with her barefoot in their kitchen, who'd built cribs and fixed leaks and whispered prayers over her belly. He had always believed the world could be made right again, if you just fought hard enough. "Looks like you were right," she whispered to the night sky. And somewhere deep inside, where grief and hope met, Monica Bennett began to feel something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Not peace, not yet, but the faintest echo of justice coming home. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta that next morning, the city felt different. The news about the investigation had broken wide open, and people were talking not just about Marcus Bennett, but about every family that ever handed a loved one over to a hospital or a funeral home and never thought to question what happened afterward. On talk radio, hosts debated the ethics of body donation programs. On TV, experts discussed how such a thing could happen for so long without anyone noticing. To most of the city, it was a scandal. To Monica, it was personal. Every headline, every sound bite, every voice analyzing her husband's fate felt like a knife twisting in her chest. She wasn't a case study or a symbol. She was a woman who had loved a man, buried him, and then found him stolen. She sat at her kitchen table that morning, a cup of coffee going cold beside her, staring at the stack of legal documents Naomi had dropped off. The pages were full of words she didn't entirely understand: wrongful disposition, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent supervision, but the meaning was clear enough. This was war. Ava sat across from her, quiet and uncertain, scrolling through her phone. "Mama," she said softly, "people at school are talking about it. They're saying you're some kind of hero." Monica looked up wary. "Baby, I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who got tired of being lied to." Later that day, Naomi called with an update. "The Attorney General's office is moving fast," she said. "They're rebuilding the criminal case against Ivanov and the funeral home owner. But they want you to testify when the time comes." Monica hesitated. "Testify? They need someone the jury will believe," Naomi said. "Someone who can put a human face on what these men did." Monica closed her eyes. The thought of standing in court, of having to relive it all, made her stomach turn. But she knew she had no choice. "I'll do it," she said quietly, "for him." In the meantime, Naomi had her own battle to fight. The hospital's legal team had begun their defense, claiming Ivanov was a rogue employee, and that they had no knowledge of his actions. Naomi laughed when she heard it. "That's the oldest trick in the book," she told Monica. "When a system breaks, they always blame one man." But she was ready. Every email, every missing report, every forged certificate was a thread she was pulling, and the whole institution was beginning to unravel. The investigation uncovered more than anyone expected. Ivanov had been running his scheme for nearly 2 decades, taking unclaimed or recently deceased bodies, forging paperwork, and selling them to medical schools across several states. Profits were split between him and a handful of funeral directors who handled the fake cremations. The discovery sent shockwaves through the state. Protesters gathered outside Atlanta Mercy Medical Center, holding signs that read, "Our dead deserve dignity and justice for the Bennetts." Reporters swarmed Monica's street, knocking on her door, calling her phone, begging for interviews. She refused most of them. But one evening, a young journalist named Denise Harper, a black woman, not much older than Ava, showed up at her door with a camera and a quiet voice. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "I don't want a sound bite. I want to tell the truth." Something about her sincerity broke through the wall Monica had built around herself. They sat at the kitchen table, the same place where everything seemed to happen now, and talked for 2 hours. Monica told her everything: the phone call, the hospital, the body, the accusations of madness, the discovery. When the interview aired, it wasn't sensational. It was raw, human, devastating. Viewers saw not just a scandal, but a story about faith, love, and the lengths a woman would go to for the truth. Overnight, Monica's name became a rallying cry. Letters poured in from families across the country, people who'd lost loved ones under suspicious circumstances, who'd been told to stop asking questions. For the first time, Monica realized she wasn't alone. But not everyone wanted her story told. One night, around midnight, she woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel outside her apartment. When she peered through the curtain, she saw a dark sedan idling by the curb. No headlights, no movement. It stayed there for nearly an hour before driving away. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door: "Let it go." The words were printed, no signature. Monica's hands trembled as she showed it to Naomi. Her sister's jaw tightened. "They re-scared," Naomi said. "Good, that means we re-close." The following week, the hospital tried to offer a settlement, $250,000, in exchange for silence. Monica didn't even hesitate. "They think they can buy peace with money," she said, her voice hard. "I don't want their money. I want my husband's name back." Naomi turned down the offer in writing. Within days, the story grew even bigger. Shin picked it up. National outlets descended on Atlanta. Under pressure, the hospital's board suspended its CO and placed the entire morgue staff on leave. The world was finally paying attention. When the DNA results were presented publicly, the impact was immediate. The Attorney General's office held a press conference, confirming that the cadaver used in the anatomy lab was indeed Monica Bennett. Cameras flashed as Monica and Ava stood beside Naomi, holding hands. "This is not just about one man," Naomi said into the microphones. "This is about accountability. This is about how institutions treat the people they were supposed to serve, especially black families who are too often dismissed and disbelieved." Her words echoed across every channel, every headline. That night, Monica went to church for the first time in years. The choir was rehearsing when she slipped into the back pew, the sanctuary filled with the smell of wax and wood polish. Pastor Hayes, an old friend of the family, noticed her and walked over quietly. "You all right, child?" he asked. Monica managed a faint smile. "Getting there," he nodded. "You've been fighting a good fight. But don't forget, even warriors need rest." She wanted to tell him she didn't know how anymore, that rest felt like betrayal. But instead she said, "When it's over, maybe." He looked at her for a long moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "God's justice may be slow, but it's sure." When the trial date was set, Monica found herself staring at the calendar, counting the days like she used to count contractions before Ava was born, steady, inevitable, terrifying. The prosecutors wanted her to take the stand early, to establish the emotional weight of the case. The thought of it made her palms sweat. Naomi coached her every night, walking her through questions, preparing her for the defense's tactics. "They were going to try to make you doubt yourself," Naomi said. "They'll ask about your mental state, about the psychiatric hold. They'll try to twist your grief into weakness." Monica nodded, steady but hollow. "Then I'll remind them that grief isn't weakness. It's proof that I loved him." As the city prepared for the trial, Monica's story began to ripple beyond Atlanta. Lawmakers started discussing reforms for morgue oversight, new penalties for trafficking human remains, and protections for families. One journalist called it the Bennett effect. Monica didn't care about the politics, but she cared about what it meant that Marcus's death, and everything stolen from them, might finally mean something bigger than pain. The night before the trial, Monica stood on her balcony again, the city lights stretching out like stars. Ava came out to join her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You ready?" she asked. Monica looked out at the skyline, at the place that had taken so much and still held her roots. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Ava smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "That's what Daddy would do." For the first time in months, Monica laughed, soft and broken, but real. "Yeah," she said. "That's exactly what he'd do." And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the grief and exhaustion, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in 20 years. The possibility that after all the pain, after all the battles, she might finally find peace. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she fought for it with everything she had left. The courtroom was colder than Monica expected. The air smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, and every sound, the shuffling of papers, the clicking of heels, the quiet coughs from the audience, seemed too loud against the silence hanging over the room. It had been almost a year since she first walked into Atlanta Mercy's anatomy lab, and saw what should have been impossible. And now she sat here, staring at the man who had made it all real, Victor Ivanov. He looked smaller than she imagined he would, his once slick hair gone gray, his suit wrinkled, his expression a mask of practiced indifference. But even from across the courtroom, Monica could feel the coldness radiating from him, not guilt, not fear. Just the arrogance of a man who'd lived too long thinking he'd never be caught. When Naomi placed a comforting hand on her knee, Monica realized she'd been gripping the edge of her chair so tightly her fingers had gone numb. "You ready?" her sister whispered. Monica nodded, though the word ready felt like a lie. How could anyone be ready to face the person who had turned her husband's body into currency? The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, a tall black woman with silver braids and a steady gaze, took her seat. State of Georgia versus Victor Ivanov and Eternal Grace Funeral Home, she announced. Charges include trafficking in human remains, fraud, falsification of government documents, and abuse of a corpse. The prosecution began by outlining the timeline: 2 decades of missing paperwork, bank transfers, falsified cremation certificates. Each piece of evidence felt like a blade scraping bone. Monica listened, her stomachs twisting as they described how Ivanov and his accomplice had stolen at least 47 bodies, forging documents and selling them to medical programs. Her husband's name, Monica Bennett, appeared again and again in the exhibits displayed for the jury: in the ledger, in the forged cremation certificate, in the records of money wired to a shell account. It was like watching his death replayed over and over, not the crash, but the theft of his dignity afterward. When it was finally her turn to testify, the courtroom fell still. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and made her way to the witness stand. Naomi met her eyes briefly, a silent message of strength. After she was sworn in, the prosecutor, a young woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried, asked her to start from the beginning. "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell the court how you first became aware that your husband's body may not have been cremated?" Monica took a breath. "I was at the hospital visiting my daughter," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "I took a wrong turn and ended up near the anatomy lab. I looked inside, and I saw something that stopped me cold: a body on the table with a titanium rod in the left thigh. My husband had one just like it. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. But then I saw more: the fused vertebrae, the hernia mesh, the implants. There were 4 markers in total, and every one matched his medical history." She paused, glancing at the jury. "I told them, the hospital staff, the administrator, everyone. But they didn't believe me. They said I was grieving, that I was unstable. They tried to have me committed to a psychiatric ward." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor nodded gently. "And were you Mrs. Bennett?" Monica met her gaze head on. "No, I was right." The defense tried to shake her. The lawyer, a tall man with a smooth southern drawl, stood and adjusted his cufflinks before approaching the stand. "Mrs. Bennett, you were a teacher, correct?" "Yes." "Not a doctor, not a forensic expert?" "No." "So when you claim you identified your husband based on a titanium rod and a few other markers, you were relying on memory from 20 years earlier, correct?" Monica's hands tightened in her lap. "I remember everything about my husband. I didn't need agree to recognize the body I buried." The lawyer smirked faintly. "But you didn't bury him, did you? You scattered ashes that, for all you know, could belong to anyone." The courtroom went silent. Monica leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's exactly the point, sir. They lied. They gave me someone else's ashes and sold my husband's body like it was property. That's why we're here." The defense lawyer hesitated, his composure faltering. For the first time, Monica felt something like power, the strength of truth, finally breaking through layers of deception. The prosecutor smiled faintly. "No further questions," the defense muttered, returning to his table. Over the next week, more witnesses came forward: medical students, hospital staff, even one former employee of Eternal Grace who confessed under oath that Ivanov had paid him cash to falsify records. The jury listened, horrified. By the time the prosecution rested, there was no doubt left about what had happened. Ivanov's attorney made one last attempt to salvage his client's reputation, claiming his actions were a misinterpretation of medical donation practices. But no one was buying it. The ledger, the DNA, the testimony, it was all too clear. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every row, cameras waiting outside. The judge's voice was steady as she read the decision on all counts: guilty. A murmur swept the room, followed by the click of cameras and the sound of Monica's quiet, shuddering breath. Ivanov didn't look at her as he was led away in handcuffs, but she didn't need him to. She had seen enough of his face to last a lifetime. Afterward, the prosecutor approached her quietly. "You did it," she said. Monica shook her head. "No, We did it, all of us. She looked around the courtroom, at the families sitting behind her mothers, fathers, siblings who had lost their own loved ones to the same scheme. Some were crying, others just stared numb. Justice was never perfect, but it was something. Outside, the cameras flashed as Monica and Nami stepped into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions. How do you feel? What does this mean for other families? But Monica barely heard them. She felt lightheaded, like the world had tilted back into place after years of being off kilter. Nami squeezed her shoulder. It's over, she said softly. Monica shook her head. No, it's just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the hospital faced its own reckoning. Administrators were fired, licenses suspended, fines levied. Atlanta Mercy issued a public apology, a formal statement read on live television. We failed our community, the CO said. We failed to protect the dignity of the deceased, and the trust of their families. Monica watched the broadcast from her living room, her arms folded across her chest. The words sounded right, but she'd learned long ago that words alone couldn't heal. Change did. And change came. Lawmakers introduced the Monica Bennett Act, a bill that would require stricter oversight of morgues and funeral homes, routine audits, and criminal penalties for falsifying cremation documents. When Monica was asked to testify before the state legislature in support of the bill, she hesitated. She was tired, bone deep tired, but she knew what Marcus would say if he were here. If something's broken, you fix it. So she went. Standing in the echoing chamber, she told her story one last time. No theatrics, no tears, just truth. My husband's body was stolen, she said to the rows of lawmakers and spectators. But that's not the only thing they took. They stole my peace, my faith in the system, my trust. I don't want another family to sit where Ivy sat, begging to be believed. Her voice was steady, now strong. This isn't just about oversight. It's about respect for the dead, and for the living who loved them. When she finished, the room was silent. Then slowly people began to clap. It wasn't polite applause, it was something deeper, a collective exhale, a recognition that her fight had mattered. The bill passed unanimously 2 months later. On the day the governor signed it into law, Monica stood beside Ava and Nami on the Capitol steps. Cameras flashed, reporters cheered, but Monica's eyes were on the small gold pen in the governor's hand. When he finished signing, he turned and handed it to her. For your husband, he said. Monica took it with trembling fingers, whispering, thank you. That night back home, she placed the pen beside Marcus's photo on the mantel. The candlelight flickered against the glass, warm and soft. Ava stood beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. He'd be proud of you, Mama, she said. Monica smiled faintly. No, baby. He'd be proud of us. For the first time in 2 decades, the apartment felt quiet in a good way, not empty, but peaceful. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside, Monica finally let herself breathe. She knew grief would never leave completely. It would always live in the spaces Marcus once filled. But now it shared room with something new, justice, earned the hard way, the only kind that ever really mattered. The months after the trial felt like living in a slow, strange echo of her own life. Atlanta moved on, as cities do, shifting its focus to new scandals and headlines. But for Monica Bennett, the silence after the storm was almost harder to bear than the noise. She had spent so long fighting, testifying, reliving the worst moments of her past, answering reporters' questions that when the fighting stopped, she didn't quite know who she was anymore. Her days were suddenly too quiet. The world that had once revolved around grief and fury now seemed unrecognizably calm. And that calm left room for something she hadn't expected, the hollow H of reality. Justice had been served, yes, but Marcus was still gone. Most mornings she woke early before dawn, sitting by the kitchen window with a cup of tea that went cold in her hands. The city outside was just beginning to stir. Headlights sliding through fog, buses sighing at corners, a street cleaner humming in the distance. She liked those moments, the half light before the world remembered itself. Sometimes she would talk to Marcus then, in whispers, like she used to when he worked late shifts. We did it, baby, she'd murmur. They finally heard us. And in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, she could almost imagine him answering back. Nami checked on her constantly, calling every evening after work. "You good?" she'd ask, and Monica would always say yes, though the truth was more complicated. Naomi, for her part, had thrown herself into advocacy. The Marcus Bennett Act had passed through the Georgia legislature. But she wasn't done. She wanted federal protections, oversight across all 50 states. She had become a recognizable face in the media, a lawyer turned reformer, her name attached to panels and commissions. Monica was proud of her, but sometimes, when the news showed Naomi at a podium surrounded by microphones, Monica felt the faint sting of distance. The fight had started in her kitchen. Now it belonged to the world. Ava, meanwhile, was thriving in her studies. She had switched her concentration from general medicine to forensic pathology, a choice that had startled Monica at first. "You sure you want to do that?" she asked one evening as they washed dishes together. Ava smiled softly. "Someone has to make sure this never happens again." Monica looked at her daughter, taller now, stronger, her eyes carrying the same fierce light Marcus used to have, and felt a complicated mix of pride and sadness. "You've got his fire," she said quietly, "and your stubbornness," Ava teased. Still, there were days when the memories pressed too hard. Sometimes she would pass a construction site and hear the clang of metal against metal, and her mind would flash to that titanium rod in Marcus's leg. Or she would catch the scent of motor oil and think of his hands, always rough and smelling faintly of work. On those days, she drove out to the cemetery where his ashes now rested. The headstone was simple gray granite with his name and the words "Finally Home." She'd sit cross-legged in the grass and talk to him, like he was right there beside her. "You know, they keep calling me strong," she'd say, picking at a blade of grass. "But I don't feel strong. I just didn't have a choice." The wind would rustle through the trees in reply, and she'd close her eyes, letting it wash over her. The public attention faded slowly. The reporters stopped coming, the calls from advocacy groups slowed. But every so often, a letter would still arrive, handwritten envelopes from strangers who had lost someone. People thanking her for refusing to give up. One came from a woman in Detroit whose brother's body had been misplaced after a hospital error. Another from a veteran's widow in New Orleans. "You gave me the courage to ask questions," one letter said. Monica kept every one of them in a shoebox under her bed, tied together with a red ribbon. It reminded her that the fight had mattered, that Marcus's story had become something larger than tragedy. One evening in late fall, she got an unexpected call from the Attorney General's office. A new investigation had begun, this time targeting several hospitals in neighboring states. "Your case helped open the door," the investigator said. "You changed policy. You changed awareness." Monica thanked him politely, but after she hung up, she sat in silence for a long time. Change was good, she knew that. But the thought that others might still be suffering the way she had made her chest tighten. For all the progress, the world still found ways to bury the truth, especially when the truth belonged to people like her. Naomi visited the next weekend, bringing groceries and gossip from Savannah. They sat on the balcony drinking sweet tea, the autumn air crisp around them. "You ever think about leaving Atlanta?" Naomi asked suddenly. "Start fresh somewhere new?" Monica looked out over the skyline. "This city's got too many ghosts," she admitted. "But it's got too many memories too." "I don't know if I could leave it." Naomi nodded. "You've earned peace, you know. You don't have to keep carrying it." Monica smiled faintly. "Maybe peace just looks different for us." That night, Monica dreamed of Marcus. Not the broken image she'd carried all those years, but the way he used to look, laughing, alive, his arms around her on their wedding day. In the dream, they were dancing in their old apartment, the radio playing All Green, her head resting against his chest. When she woke, her face was wet with tears, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. By early winter, invitations started coming for speaking engagements. Churches, universities, even a medical conference in Chicago wanted her to share her story. At first, she hesitated. She'd spent years fighting to be heard. Now the idea of speaking in front of crowds felt almost too raw. But Ava pushed her gently. "Mama, people need to hear it from you," she said. "Not lawyers or reporters, you." So Monica went. Her first talk was at a small community center in Decatur. The room was full of women mothers, nurses, teachers, and as she spoke, she saw their faces change. They weren't just hearing about Marcus. They were hearing about every time their own truth had been dismissed. Every moment, they'd been told to be quiet. When the event ended, women lined up to hug her, some crying, some whispering thank you. Monica drove home that night in silence, realizing that maybe this was her new purpose, to speak not for sympathy, but for remembrance. In January, the city dedicated a memorial to the victims of the hospital scandal. It stood in a small park near downtown, a curved wall of dark stone etched with the names of the 47 stolen souls. Marcus's name was near the center. The air was cold that morning, the kind of cold that makes breath visible. Monica stood with Ava and Naomi, her gloved hand brushing the carved letters. "Finally," she whispered, "they all remember you, right?" After the ceremony, a reporter approached her with a microphone. "Mrs. Bennett," she asked, "do you feel closure now?" Monica looked past her, toward the monument gleaming under the weak winter sun. "Closure's not real," she said simply. "But peace is. And I think I'm learning how to live with that." That night, when they got home, Ava lit a candle on the mantel beside Marcus's photo. The flame flickered gently, casting warm light across the room. "You think he sees all this?" Ava asked. Monica smiled, her eyes soft. "If he doesn't, he's missing one hell of a story." They both laughed, and for the first time, the sound didn't feel like it carried sorrow behind it, just love. The years ahead were uncertain, but Monica had stopped fearing uncertainty. She had learned that grief was not a wound that healed, but a landscape she had learned to walk through, one step at a time. Somewhere between loss and justice, she had built a kind of life again, fragile, imperfect, but hers. And on nights when the wind blew through the city, carrying echoes of the past, she would whisper into the dark, "I kept my promise, baby. I brought you home." And the wind, soft and steady, always seemed to whisper back. Spring arrived in Atlanta like a slow forgiveness, softening the edges of a city that had been holding its breath for too long. The trees along Auburn Avenue bloomed early that year, their pale pink petals drifting through the air like bits of ash turned beautiful. Monica Bennett noticed them from her classroom window as she erased the chalkboard one afternoon. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't counting down minutes or waiting for something terrible to happen. The trial was behind her, the laws had changed, and her husband's name was no longer a headline, but a part of history. Yet even as the noise faded, there were days when the quiet carried its own kind of weight, the strange heaviness of survival. She'd returned to teaching full-time, though the children looked at her differently now. Some of their parents whispered when they saw her at the grocery store or the gas station, their voices carrying that uneasy mix of admiration and pity reserved for people who'd lived through the unthinkable. Her students didn't fully understand, but they sensed something sacred about her silence. Sometimes when she caught one of them staring, she'd smile and say, "It's okay, baby. You can ask." One boy finally did. "Miss Bennett, is it true they found your husband?" She paused, lowering herself to his level. "They found what was left of him," she said softly. "But what matters is that they can't take his peace again." He nodded, accepting that simple truth better than most adults ever could. After school, she'd often drive by the courthouse, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that justice, however late, had finally come. The building stood the same as before, gray and severe, but the air around it felt different now, lighter somehow. One afternoon, she noticed a small crowd gathered on the courthouse steps, students from a local college holding handmade signs. "No more stolen bodies. Protect our dead." The sight made her throat tighten. They were so young, but their voices were strong. She pulled over and listened for a while, unseen, proud in a way that surprised her. Naomi called nearly every day. Her schedule had become relentless: interviews, advocacy meetings, legislative hearings, but she never missed her evening check-in. "You still keeping your head above water, little sis?" she'd ask, and Monica would laugh. "Trying to." Sometimes Naomi would vent about the politics of reform, the pushback, the bureaucracy, and Monica would just listen, smiling. "You were always the fighter," she'd say. "I just got loud when I had to." "You got loud when it mattered," Naomi would reply. Their bond had deepened through the chaos, forged in fire and loss. They had spent years talking about justice as an idea. Now they were learning what it looked like in practice, messy, exhausting but real. Ava, meanwhile, had grown into her own kind of strength. She was working as a lab assistant at Emory's medical school, studying to become a forensic pathologist. The first time she put on her white coat, she sent Monica a picture. "Guess I'm walking back into the world that broke us," she'd written, "so I can fix it." Monica stared at the photo for a long time before replying. "Make sure they remember who you're redoing it for." Ava had inherited her father's steady hands and her mother's resolve. She carried their story into every autopsy, every classroom, every late-night study session. But even as life moved forward, the past had its way of bleeding through. One evening, while sorting through boxes in the closet, Monica found a shoebox she didn't recognize. Inside were old photographs of her and Marcus road trips, birthdays, the ultrasound image of Ava when she was just a blur on black film. Beneath those was something she hadn't expected, a folded sheet of paper with Marcus's handwriting. It was a letter, dated a week before the accident. "If anything ever happens to me," it read, "don't let this world turn you bitter. Promise me that." Her hands shook as she traced the ink. She had broken that promise 1,000 times, she thought, but maybe, in finding the truth, she had kept it in the only way she could. In April, the city hosted a memorial service for the 47 victims of the body trafficking scandal. It was held at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, a place that had seen its share of mourning and resurrection. Monica sat in the front row beside Naomi and Ava, her heart pounding as the choir sang Precious Lord. The sanctuary was full, families of the other victims, doctors, clergy, even lawmakers. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the pulpit slowly, her palms damp. The crowd fell silent. "For years," she began, "I believed my husband was gone, and I made peace with that. What I couldn't live with was the idea that someone profited from his death, that they saw his body not as a life lived, but as a product to be sold. That's what this fight was about. Dignity, love, the right to rest." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "To every family here, we may have lost them once, but we brought them home together." When she stepped down, people stood to applaud. Some cried openly. Others reached out to touch her hand as she passed. Naomi squeezed her arm and whispered, "He'd be proud." Ava, tears streaming down her cheeks, added softly, "You gave them all back their names." For the first time, Monica believed it. In the months that followed, she started volunteering with a support group for families dealing with wrongful death cases. She didn't speak much at first, preferring to listen, mothers, with others, each telling stories that sounded painfully familiar. Eventually, one evening, when the group fell quiet, she said, "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about making sure the truth doesn't die with them." The room nodded in silent understanding. Despite the healing, there were moments when the weight of everything would hit her all over again. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in just like the one from years before, the one that had cracked open her world. The lightning lit up the living room, and for a moment she saw her reflection in the window, not the broken woman she'd once been, but someone older, steadier, carrying both pain and peace in equal measure. She whispered into the storm, "We made it, baby. I kept my promise." By summer, a documentary crew had begun filming a series on the case, focusing on systemic corruption in hospitals and funeral homes. They wanted Monica's perspective. At first, she declined. She was tired of cameras, tired of reliving it. But after thinking it over, she agreed on one condition: they had to tell the story right. "Don't make it tragedy porn," she told them firmly. "Make it truth." The director, a young black woman named Tasha, nodded. "That's exactly what I want. she said. During filming, Tasha asked Monica what she hoped people would take from her story. Monica thought for a long moment before answering. That silence is what keeps evil alive. And that sometimes, even when the world calls you crazy, you have to keep talking. When the documentary aired 6 months later, it was raw and unflinching, not just about the crime, but about the courage it took to expose it. Viewers around the country wrote in with their own stories, some painful, some redemptive. For Monica, watching it was like holding a mirror up to her own soul. She saw the version of herself she had been trembling, uncertain, but still standing, and realized that she didn't need to be ashamed of the woman who broke before she healed. Life didn't return to normal, because normal had never really been the point. Instead, it found a rhythm again. She taught, she gardened, she laughed more with Ava. Sometimes she even sang along to the radio. One Sunday evening, while sitting on her porch watching the sun set behind the skyline, Naomi called. "You doing okay?" she asked. Monica smiled, watching the light fade into gold. "Better than okay," she said. "I think I'm finally at peace." And for once, she meant it. The city that had once been a place of loss now felt like home again, imperfect, flawed, but alive. The ghosts were still there, yes, but they had grown quieter, more forgiving. Somewhere in the hum of the street below, she could almost hear Marcus's laugh, soft, familiar, eternal. "You can rest now," she whispered into the warm evening air. "We all home." The summer after the memorial felt like a new season in Monica Bennett's life, not just in weather, but in spirit. Atlanta pulsed with humidity and light, cicadas singing in the trees, kids running through open hydrants on cracked sidewalks. Life was moving forward, unapologetic, unstoppable. For the first time in decades, Monica found herself moving with it. She still carried the ache of what had been lost, but it no longer defined her. Grief had become something quieter now, folded into the corners of her days, a presence, not a wound. In July, she took a leave of absence from teaching and started working with a nonprofit that Naomi helped launch, the Monica Bennett Foundation. Its mission was simple but powerful: to provide legal and emotional support to families navigating wrongful death or body donation disputes. The foundation's office was small, tucked between a barber shop and a soul food restaurant in downtown Atlanta, but it hummed with purpose. On her first day, Monica walked in to find half a dozen volunteers already at work, sorting through intake forms and answering calls. On the wall behind the reception desk hung a large photo of Marcus smiling, alive above the words, "Every life deserves respect." She stood there a long time, her throat tight, before whispering, "We did it, baby." The work was heavy, sometimes brutal. Families came in with stories eerily similar to hers: lost records, unreturned calls, hospitals that treated their loved ones like property. Some came in angry, others just numb. Monica listened to all of them, her voice steady and soft. She didn't promise miracles, but she offered something better: understanding. "I can't fix the past," she'd say gently, "but I can help you fight for the truth." In those moments, she could feel Marcus close by, as if his spirit had found a way to live through her compassion. Naomi handled the legal side, shuffling between meetings at the courthouse and late nights drafting appeals. She'd joke that Monica was the heart while she was the hammer, but Monica knew her sister carried her own private exhaustion. The two of them had become something like local legends, though neither wanted the fame. Every so often, a stranger would stop them on the street, an older woman clutching her grocery bags, a young man in scrubs, and thank them for what they'd done. Monica always smiled politely, but those encounters left her quiet afterward. "I never asked to be anyone's symbol," she told Naomi one night as they locked up the office. Naomi smiled softly. "You didn't have to ask, you earned it." Ava visited often between classes, bringing fresh energy into the tired little office. She was deep into her forensic program now, excelling in every subject. "You know they call me Doc Bennett already," she teased one afternoon, dropping by with coffee for everyone. Monica laughed, proud. "You've got a long way before anyone puts doctor in front of your name, but I like the sound of it." Ava winked. "Guess I get it from my daddy's stubborn and unstoppable." That made them both laugh, though the laughter had an undertone of H. The more time passed, the more Marcus's absence felt like a legacy instead of a loss. In August, the foundation received a grant from the state, enough to expand its work beyond Georgia. The news felt surreal. Reporters came by again, but this time the coverage was celebratory rather than sorrowful. They wanted photos, interviews, success stories. Monica gave them only what she was comfortable with. "This isn't about fame," she told one journalist. "It's about making sure no one else gets forgotten." Still, part of her couldn't help feeling that Marcus's story had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined, a movement rooted in truth and love. But peace didn't come without its shadows. The work often brought back painful memories. One afternoon, a woman came into the foundation clutching a plastic folder, her hands trembling. She said her son's body had been misplaced after a hospital fire. As Monica flipped through the paperwork, she recognized the same patterns: missing signatures, duplicate dates, falsified transfers. The woman's voice cracked as she asked, "Do you think I'll ever find him?" Monica looked up, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant the body or the truth. That night, she went home exhausted, lying awake long after midnight. Sometimes justice didn't feel like victory, it felt like survival. Around that same time, the state announced the creation of a new oversight committee to monitor hospitals and morgues, a direct result of the Monica Bennett Act. When the governor invited Monica to serve as an honorary member, she hesitated. "I'm not a politician," she told Naomi. "I'm just a teacher." Naomi smiled knowingly. "You read the reason that committee exists. They need someone who remembers what this really means." Monica agreed, though she kept her involvement quiet. She didn't want attention, she wanted change. The meetings were long and bureaucratic, full of jargon and red tape, but Monica learned to speak their language. She challenged complacency, demanded accountability, and reminded them that behind every line of policy was a family like hers. Some of the officials underestimated her at first, a soft-spoken black woman without a law degree, but they stopped underestimating her once she started speaking. "We were not talking about paperwork," she said during one heated discussion. "We were talking about people, about sons and husbands and mothers. Paper can be fixed. Pain can't." The room went silent, and after that, when Monica spoke, everyone listened. That fall, the foundation held its first fundraising gala at the Atlanta History Center. It was elegant but understated: candles, jazz, photographs of the victims displayed along the walls. Ava gave a short speech, her voice trembling with pride as she introduced her mother. When Monica took the stage, the audience rose to its feet in applause. She stood at the podium, a little stunned by the sea of faces looking back at her survivors: doctors, lawyers, students, politicians. "When this all began," she said slowly, "I thought I was fighting to bring one man home. I didn't realize I was helping to bring a whole community back to life. My husband's story isn't just mine anymore, it's ours. It belongs to every person who refuses to accept silence as the answer." After the event, as the crowd thinned and the music softened, Monica slipped out to the garden for a moment of quiet. The air was cool and fragrant with magnolia. She tilted her head back, looking at the stars. "You see what we built, Marcus?" she whispered. "You'd laugh if you could see me in a fancy dress giving speeches. But we did it, baby. We really did it." For a moment, she thought she felt a warm breeze brush her cheek, gentle, like a hand she once knew. The night ended late, but she didn't feel tired. Driving home through the sleeping city, she realized that what she felt wasn't closure, it was something deeper. She had turned her pain into purpose, her loss into a kind of light that reached beyond her own life. And though the ache would never disappear completely, it no longer defined her. It reminded her. When she got home, Ava was waiting up, curled on the couch with a blanket. "How was it?" she asked sleepily. Monica smiled. "Beautiful." "He would have been proud." Ava yawned and said, "He is proud." Monica kissed her forehead. "Go to bed, baby." After Ava disappeared down the hall, Monica stood in the quiet living room, looking at Marcus's photo on the mantel. She lit a small candle, the flame steady and gold. "Rest easy," she whispered. "Your story's still working." And as the candle flickered, casting its glow across the room, Monica understood something she hadn't before, that justice wasn't a single moment in court or a law signed into being. It was the daily act of remembrance, the quiet promise to keep telling the truth long after the world stopped listening. And in that promise, she found the kind of peace that finally felt like forever. Winter crept back into Atlanta slowly, with a kind of gentleness that made the cold almost bearable. The streets glittered with frost in the early mornings, and the city lights reflected it off puddles from half-melted rain. Monica Bennett found herself walking more those days, not because she needed to go anywhere, but because the movement kept her mind quiet. She'd learned to love the hum of the city again, the distant sound of trains, the rhythm of life returning after so many years of chaos. Her life was no longer defined by grief or anger. It was something else now, steadier, stronger, woven with purpose. She had found a way to live alongside the past instead of under it. Every Sunday, she went to the small church on Auburn Avenue where she and Marcus had been married. The pews were older now, the hymnals worn, but the sanctuary still smelled of cedar and candle wax. The congregation knew her story, but no one treated her like a celebrity anymore. They treated her like family, the way they always had before the headlines. Pastor Hayes always nodded when he saw her, giving a small smile of acknowledgement. During the service, she'd close her eyes and let the gospel chorus voices wash over her. There was something healing in their sound, in the rising harmonies, that seemed to stitch her heart back together each week. Outside of church, her days were simple. She worked part-time at the foundation, mentoring new volunteers and meeting with families who still needed help navigating the aftermath of loss. The Monica Bennett Foundation had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. They had offices in 3 states now, and a scholarship fund in Marcus's name that supported students of color pursuing careers in forensic science and law. Sometimes, she'd walk past the wall of photographs in the main office, rows of faces of people they'd helped, and feel the quiet pulse of gratitude. She didn't need recognition, this was enough. Ava was in her final year of med school, working long hours in the lab and talking excitedly about her residency applications. "Mama," she said one night over dinner, "I'm thinking about staying here in Atlanta. The medical examiner's office offered me a position after graduation." Monica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You sure you want that?" "Yeah," Ava said. "This city's got history. I want to be part of fixing it." Monica smiled softly. "You already are." She studied her daughter's face, the same determined expression Marcus used to wear when he was trying to solve something mechanical. There was a steadiness in Ava now, a quiet fire that gave Monica both comfort and pride. Naomi was busier than ever, dividing her time between legal reform efforts and guest lectures at universities. She'd become something of a national figure, calm, razor sharp, the woman who turned tragedy into change. Still, she called Monica almost every night, even if it was just to share a funny story or complain about a long day. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked once, laughing softly. "You teaching again, me buried under her paperwork for justice reform." Monica smiled. "Marcus would ve said we were both crazy." "He would ve been right," Naomi replied, and they laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks. By early February, the city council had announced plans to name a new community center after Marcus. The building would house programs for health education, grief counseling, and youth mentorship, a living space for healing. When they told Monica, she was stunned. "He'd be embarrassed," she said with a laugh. "He never liked attention." "Maybe," Naomi said, "but he deserves it." The dedication ceremony was scheduled for the first week of March, and as the date approached, Monica felt a mixture of nerves and peace. She wasn't one for speeches anymore, but this time, she wanted to speak. The morning of the ceremony was clear and cold, sunlight cutting across the skyline. The new Monica Bennett Community Center stood at the edge of Sweet Auburn, its red, brick walls still smelling of paint and promise. Hundreds gathered: neighbors, city officials, families from the foundation, even a few of the students who had received scholarships. When Monica stepped up to the podium, the crowd quieted. She looked out at the faces, at Ava standing beside Naomi, and took a breath. When Marcus and I got married, she began, we didn't have much. Just love, faith, and a belief that if you take care of people, the world has a way of taking care of you back. It took me a long time to understand that even after everything was taken from him, he was still giving something a reason for change, a lesson in courage. She paused, her voice catching. This building isn't about loss. It's about what can rise from it. It's about the kind of light that doesn't die, even when people try to bury it. When she finished, the audience rose to its feet in applause. Ava walked up and wrapped her arms around her mother. You did good, Mama, she whispered. Monica smiled through her tears. We did. After the ribbon was cut, she wandered through the halls of the new building. The air smelled of new beginnings, fresh paint, polished floors, hope. On one wall was a mural depicting Marcus's story, a man rising from waves of shadow, his figure blending into a city skyline filled with stars. Beneath it were words she'd once written in a letter to the governor, Nor, justice isn't revenge. It's restoration. Seeing it there made her chest tighten. It was Marcus's story, yes, but it was also hers. Later that night, back at home, Monica sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The air was crisp, the stars clear. She sipped her tea slowly, watching her breath drift in the cold. Life was quieter now, but not empty. The pain had softened into something almost sacred, a reminder of how far she'd come. She thought of the woman she'd been all those years ago, the one who'd stood on a beach with an urn in her hands, whispering goodbye to ashes that weren't even her husband's. That woman had been broken but brave. This woman, the one sitting here now, was whole in a different way. She looked out toward the city lights and spoke softly, as if Marcus were sitting in the chair beside her. You see it, baby. They built you a place where people can heal. The wind rustled through the trees, a soft, almost musical sound. She smiled. I guess that means we did all right. Before going inside, she stopped by the mantel and lit the small candle that had burned beside Marcus's photo for years. Its flame flickered steady and sure. Ava had once joked that the candle had outlived half their appliances. But Monica liked to think it burned so long because it had purpose, just like her. As she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she thought of something Marcus had said long ago. One of those offhand phrases that had stuck with her. You can't always fix the world, Mon. But you can leave it better than you found it. She smiled in the dark. We did, Marcus, she whispered. We really did. Outside, the city pulsed quietly, alive and eternal. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled, carrying its low, steady note through the night. Monica closed her eyes, letting the sound lull her into sleep. And in that moment between memory and peace, between what was and what had become, she finally felt what she had been chasing all along. Not closure, not justice, but something gentler, truer, the kind of peace that doesn't ask to be earned, only lived. The story of Monica Bennett isn't just a tragedy wrapped in courtroom victories and headlines, it's a mirror. One that reflects the quiet resilience of ordinary people forced to stand against the weight of indifference. Her journey teaches that justice, real justice, isn't something handed down by systems or institutions. It's something carved out of pain, persistence, and faith when the world insists on silence. Monica's life reminds us that sometimes the truth doesn't roar. Sometimes it starts as a whisper, a gut feeling that something isn't right, and grows louder only because one person refuses to stop speaking, even when no one wants to listen. In that way, her story is not about death or corruption, but about endurance. About the power of one woman's voice to shake an entire structure built to ignore her. At its core, this story is a testament to love, not the easy, romantic kind that fades when things fall apart, but the kind that endures when love itself becomes a fight. Monica's love for Marcus didn't end the day he died, and it didn't fade when the world told her to move on. It transformed into a relentless force for truth. The world often underestimates that kind of love, especially when it comes from a black woman, a demographic too often labeled angry, when they were simply standing up for their humanity. Yet Monica's quiet defiance exposed a system that saw her husband not as a human being but as a commodity. Her persistence forced those who had turned away to confront what they had done, and what they had ignored. Through her, we learn that love, when anchored in purpose, can become a revolution in itself. There's also a lesson here about power: who holds it, who abuses it, and who dares to reclaim it. The institutions that failed Monica, the hospital, the funeral home, the justice system, were built to protect people like her in theory. But in practice, they protected themselves. The arrogance of bureaucracy, the coldness of paperwork, the dismissal of a woman's voice as hysteria, these aren't just plot points in her story. They were reflections of a society that often places convenience above truth and hierarchy above humanity. Yet Monica, armed with nothing but her certainty and her sister's belief, broke through that structure. She didn't dismantle it overnight, but she cracked it enough to let the light in. Her story teaches that power is not invincible. It is only as strong as the silence that sustains it. The world saw Monica as a widow, a victim, a face of injustice, but what she truly became was a teacher. Not in her classroom with chalk and lesson plans, but in life itself. Through her choices, she taught what it means to fight without hatred, to demand answers without losing empathy. Her victory wasn't just in the courtroom, it was in the way she refused to let the system harden her heart. Even after betrayal, she continued to see people: the students she taught, the families she helped, even the strangers who whispered thanks. The story reminds us that survival is not only about endurance, but about preserving kindness in a world determined to strip it away. Another truth that shines through Monica's journey is that grief never really disappears, it evolves. The story doesn't end with closure, because grief isn't a door you walk through and shut behind you. It's a room you learn to live in, to decorate, to breathe in, to find comfort in over time. Monica didn't move on from Marcus. She moved with him, carrying his memory into every action, every reform, every heartbeat of the foundation that bore his name. This is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all, that healing isn't forgetting, it's transforming. The love that once broke her became the love that rebuilt her. Her daughter Ava's decision to enter forensic medicine carries another lesson: the inheritance of strength. The pain of one generation became the purpose of the next. Through Ava, we see how trauma can become legacy, how stories of injustice can give birth to professions of healing. The world often views black pain as something to pity or sensationalize. But Monica's family redefines it as something to build upon, not to glorify suffering, but to honor it by creating something better. That is what resilience looks like, not pretending the hurt didn't happen, but refusing to let it define the future. The broader social lesson of Monica's story stretches far beyond Atlanta. It forces us to question how easily institutions can lose their humanity when unchecked, and how marginalized voices, particularly black women's voices, are often treated as inconvenient truths rather than vital warnings. The same courage that made Monica difficult in the eyes of authority is what made her righteous in the eyes of history. Her fight wasn't just personal, it was political. It called out the ways systemic racism and gender bias intersect to silence those who refuse to conform. In her struggle, we were reminded that justice movements don't start in courtrooms, they start in living rooms, in whispered conversations, in the trembling hands of people who've had enough. Even more quietly, the story shows that forgiveness isn't weakness. When Monica stood before the hospital board years later, listening to their apologies, she didn't respond with fury. She didn't absolve them either. She simply said, "Do better." That moment carried more strength than any anger could. Forgiveness for her wasn't about letting go of the past, but reclaiming her peace from it. It was her way of saying, "You will not own my pain anymore." And that is something every person who's ever been wronged must learn, that forgiveness is not surrender, it's freedom. In the end, Monica's story becomes a meditation on the meaning of home. For 20 years, she thought she had buried her husband by the sea, scattering ashes that weren't his. But home, she came to realize, wasn't about where you lay the body, it was about where love keeps returning. When she built the foundation, when she mentored other families, when she stood under the mural at the community center, bearing Marcus's name, those were all forms of bringing him home. Home is where truth finally rests, where memory becomes light instead of shadow. So what is the lesson? It's that love and truth, when joined together, can outlast everything: corruption, time, even death. It's that one person's refusal to stay silent can ripple through a nation and change the law. It's that grief can be both a burden and a gift, a wound that teaches you how to heal others. And perhaps most importantly, it's that the human spirit, especially the spirit of women like Monica Bennett, cannot be bought, buried, or burned. It will rise again and again until the world listens. Her story reminds us that justice isn't an ending. It's a beginning, one built not from vengeance, but from courage, compassion, and unshockable love. And in that truth lies the final, enduring lesson that peace is not found in forgetting what hurt you, but in transforming it into something that helps someone else survive. If you enjoy stories that make you think twice before turning off the lights, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are still many things left unsaid, and we'll continue exploring them together.